Wow. Man, that was a loud. Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of Fintech Insider News on Air. We've got a huge amount of really interesting questions that have come through again, and we've managed to whittle it down to, I think, 4 that I think are probably going to be the most interesting ones to fly through. Before we get started, we have replaced one Simon for another Simon, so we probably should introduce the other Simon that's joined us today. So Simon Vans-Colina from Monzo. Simon, do you want to say who you are and what you do?
My name's Simon, I'm an engineer at Monzo. I work on API things. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for joining us. Literally got here about 60 seconds ago, so like landed in, straight into the room, 30 seconds of briefing, so this is going to be fun. Like, there's nothing
and is this going to be a constant thing of finding new Simons, or
like if you can't have it, like if I'm away, you need another David, another Jason, another Zoe, you know. So we'll just keep flicking
that's
around.
The thing.
Yeah, seems like a hard stipulation, doesn't it? But I think we'll give it a go.
I'm up for the challenge.
Indeed. So let's get into it anyway. Zoe, what's up with the first question?
All right, our first question is from Igor. Do you agree that the biggest bank without the banking license, aka banking platform, is the future of banking?
I think personally, a great question. Like the whole sort of bank as a platform, bank as a service thing has been around for quite a lot of time now. I think it's a potential future, and guys, correct me where you think it is, but I don't think there is only one future now. I think this is the great thing. It's actually with the sort of divergence of everything that we're seeing coming through, then there's a place for universal banks, there's a place for challenger banks, there's a place for everything from a banking and platform, banking as a service perspective, and kind of everything in the mix. The brilliant thing is actually predominantly from a customer's perspective that there's real choice now. So for me, the idea of not just selling your own products, and I'm sure you've got many sort of views on this one, Simon, as well. The idea of not just selling your own products, but actually aggregating and selling everything that actually might be not only within the financial services context, but much broader than that, seems very sensible to me. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think from a consumer's point of view, I think like the banks of the future are going to be better than the banks that you can get now. I think that's like broadly the important thing. Which actual model works out, I think it's just in the details,
Yeah. What do you think, Joe?
I think I'm going back to my standard refrain about products and services, that ultimately the bank of the future will have a variety of intelligent services, or the banking service of the future will have all of these intelligent services built on top of banking products. And the fastest way to market, as we know too well, is not to go 2 years to get a banking license, but to build on someone else's platform. And so there will be a whole plethora of new intelligent services built on top of banking products. And it's an interesting question as to whether those intelligent services are within the same organization and within the same entity or not. You could see, you can see a future where Wirecard for fintechs is replaced by Clearbank or Solaris or one of those new bank platform players, where they've just got great APIs, they've got great connectivity, they've got great tech, and they just take that banking product away. We're not there now. Open banking won't give us anywhere near the APIs in order to be able to deliver those great experiences. You can't get sub-accounts, you can't get fine-grained permissions, you can't get webhooks, metadata, a whole host of things that you just won't be able to deliver. So I think in the short term, that's going to be very difficult to add to add truly great intelligent services on the top. I think longer term it's very possible, but then you get into questions of business model, because obviously banking isn't only about the platform and the license, it's how you make money. So if this is a case of suddenly not being able to invest that whole series of account balances into something else and making money in between, then how are you going to make money on that top layer? And is that a subscription play or a marketplace or affiliate fees? So it's there's all kinds of facets, but I could see it as a potential future.
I think exactly what you say, that change is almost a sort of cultural acceptance one as much as anything there, isn't it? So, because actually when you're talking about real disruption from a business model perspective, then that's really tough, right? You're almost the letting go of some of those sort of sacred cows, and all of this is predicated on using and facilitating data in a completely different way. And I'm not so sure without that major cultural change that actually an incumbent could react in that way. Selling other people's products, if they're outside of FS, is a completely different thing from selling your mortgage, isn't it? So, do we think the incumbents can make that level of change?
I've just come from the open banking workshop, like literally before I came here, and
perfect timing.
In that room was all of the ASPSPs, the banks, and like a lot of PISPs, the payment initiators and account information service providers and the open banking implementation entity, all like 100 and something of us sitting in a room talking about this stuff, and it was really positive. Like people are just getting on with it. And the purpose of the meeting today was to talk about the V2 API. So like they're aware that not everything that the trusted third parties, the TPPs, want to do is available on the first version of the API. And honestly, it was like really positive, the level of discussion between the ASPSPs saying, you know, like we understand and we accept that like PSD2 requires us to make these things available to you, and broadly, I don't think they were dragging their feet that much. The people in the room seemed really positive about like, let's just do it in the best possible way. And you said no webhooks, and like that literally came up 10 minutes ago, and the person who brought it up, I believe, works for a bank, and they said like, you know, like we're going to give you this access. We don't want you to poll us continuously. We want to give you webhooks. So, and then the open banking implementation entity were like, cool, okay, let's just change the version of the specification so that TPPs can get a real-time webhook. I think in this specific example, it was when a person cancels their mandate for a payment. So that's better for the TPP because they know immediately that the payment's been cancelled, so that it helps their workflow. It's better for the bank because they're not getting polled continuously. And like I watched that happen in the room. It was really, really positive, and like I'm really optimistic about the process. And compared to like, from what I hear, I mean, I'm really excited at the fact that Britain's doing this. Like, the UK is just leaning so far forward into this. It's incredible it's an incredible time.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to hear people are being so positive about it, and it's you know, it's great to see it all sort of come to fruition, really. But great question though. So maybe moving on to the next one.
Yeah, from one open banking question to another. Kevin Rudinduka, open banking starts in Europe. How does it affect banks in Africa as it unfolds in Europe? What do you think, guys?
Good question. You know, the work that we've been doing lately it's amazing how far the ripples of all this one is spreading. You know, from you know, tips of Africa to out into the US and Australia. You know, everybody is very much kind of looking at what Europe and as you say, Simon, the UK is doing in this space. So I kind of think even if obviously with the regulation from a European perspective, these things are becoming mandatory, but out into Africa it's not. But people are still adhering to the standards. You know, so to your point, I don't think there's the kind of closed-mindedness of until we're forced to do this, we won't. Which actually we've seen probably over the last 10 years in terms of exposing this type of data and APIs generally to people through kind of fear of loss of control. So actually everybody's really getting on board. I think people are seeing that through organizations getting ahead of it with, you know, big incumbent banks like BBVA doing it and like their world's not ending. Then actually we're in a situation where people are getting in the game.
I think that was really surprising when we were in Africa or in the US before Christmas. You know, areas that are just not affected by any of that legislation. There are lots of people looking at this and saying, well, how quickly do you think it will come over here and how quickly can we take advantage of it? And I think that comes back to API business models and players are being driven by competition and regulation. So in the regulated areas, you know, we're having the, you know, within Europe, the legal push to make APIs available, but ultimately then that opens the door to the competition play, which is actually what APIs are we going to make available? Are we going to go above and beyond what's there? The regulation isn't even in our geography, but maybe we can argue with our local regulator that because they're doing it in Europe, it might fit over here. So I think that those two drivers, you know, we're seeing the baseline being put in by regulation, but beyond that, competition can start taking over, and especially tier 2, tier 3 banks and players are starting to say, wow, we could suddenly have a walled garden and have, you know, the whole startup army helping our bank become a tier 1 player, whereas, you know, we don't have that that ground to protect.
Well, there's definitely evidence of that, isn't it? That's come up in a lot of conversations really about almost challenging the suppliers to banks with being able to use, you know, 2-3 man startups who are really capable in this stuff So it's a really interesting sort of dynamic. I don't know if you've got opinion. Have you been asked to Africa to go and talk about open banking?
I've actually never been to Africa except Morocco.
So if you've got a need, Simon Vans-Colina,
Someone's
Twitter.
Busy. I think the eye-opening thing for me is that regulation can not just be about walls; it can be about bridges into new markets and new opportunities as well.
Good soundbite.
Nice.
Great. You can have that one. Yeah. I think it's. Some things just wouldn't happen unless everybody moves at the same time and everybody opens up the same amount at the same time. And once that happens, it just creates a new market, And I think this is one of those great examples where the CMA has done a fantastic job of just seeing where the world is going and just saying you know what, let's just make the best version of it. And I'm really excited about that.
But where do you stand on sort of standards versus evolving APIs? Because that always seems to come up. On one hand, email, FTP, HTTP, they were the standards on which the internet was built. But then we had that whole period where browsers were introducing a whole variety of new things, and then ultimately the organization would see what worked and then get back together in order to then codify that. Do you see a similar thing for financial services, or is it a different territory?
Well, the browser standards, the HTTP standards, and the RFCs evolved over a much longer period than the open banking implementation entities had. Imagine they have to take 9 of the biggest banks and the biggest regulated institutions in the world and get them to agree on something and implement it with incredibly aggressive timelines. And I think. When you actually see what they've done, even though the big story last week was that a few of the banks are a bit late, but in the room today everyone was yeah, you know what, we missed a deadline by a week or two. Some of the banks are a little bit further behind, but all of them have done something and they're all going to launch this one API. And I think it'll be one of those things where as soon as the API is out, it'll be super obvious about how it can be better. And we've kickstarted this process of rapid iteration now. I think the API will evolve. Version 2 has already been discussed, and in the room they're talking about things that aren't in scope for version 2 but are definitely in scope for version 3, and it's just going to get better and better now, and I think that's just broadly really positive.
And that's actually fundamentally different to any regulation that's come before it, right? If the difference between the releases of PSD and PSD2, people waited until it was mandated to make those changes. So if now actually what we're seeing is people picking up the mantle and moving that stuff, it feels like there's a community around that moving it forward. That's fundamentally different to how regulation's been implemented in the past.
Of course, the open banking implementation entity is not going to end. It's not going to shut down at the end of its mandate. It's going to be part of the new whatever payment scheme organisation, and its work will continue. So, the future is API driven.
So, is there a press release, a kind of mandated company, not company line, a line around the people doing APIs? Because I think what's interested me is we came to Saturday or we came to the weekend and it's okay, it's all live. It's it's January. Now is where it should happen. And then there was actually just quite a lot of silence.
And then press releases.
And then there were press releases, and then it was some of the banks are going to miss it. And all this, I'm not sure I saw a clear message as to where this was and when people would see the first, startups or AISPs, PISPs in the market.
So Monzo, for clarity, has launched an API to coincide with the open banking release, which was on Saturday. We blogged about that on Friday. We're not implementing the open banking API specification. We're not part of the 9 big banks, and the specification is evolving very quickly. So we wanted to do something with open banking. We didn't want to be left behind, and we have the opportunity to move really quickly. So we've released an interim API.
Sure.
And we blogged about it on Friday, and as of now, there's 8 to 10 firms which have got in touch. 6 of them are into the process of onboarding, and one of them has already put out a press release, which is Emma, the financial app. They're already talking about their public integration. I expect there'll be a few more press releases, but I don't want to steal their thunder by pre-announcing who they're going to be.
What about the big banking side, I guess? Because when should we expect, and I know you don't represent the organisation or anything to do that, but is there anything that kind of has come out about when we should expect the first consumer implementations of open banking stuff?
I'm not sure what you mean. Do you mean big banks connecting into each other?
When will someone be using the new open banking API interfaces?
Monday or Tuesday next week.
Right.
Honestly, from what I've heard, there's I've heard rumours. The AISPs that I've spoken to have told me about the implementations and how they're going with the other banks, and like broadly, they're getting on with it. It's happening.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think really it's going to be soon.
Awesome.
Right, moving on to question 3 from Amika Nwanu. How can challengers or incumbents create and sustain any kind of differentiation in the market? If incumbents are able to offer similar products to challengers, what will impact customers' decision making?
You're probably way better placed in this one than me.
I don't know. I mean, we've this is a question that often comes up with I think big banks. I think if you go back to like business school strategy stuff, how do you differentiate? There's cost differentiation, and a lot of the fintechs and new challenger banks have a much lower cost base, an order of magnitude lower cost base. There's feature differentiation if you're doing really interesting in real-time intelligent services, and obviously that pushes things along. And there's also focusing on a particular niche. I mean, this is classic Michael Porter stuff. And again, we see fintechs focus on remittances or everyday money or forex or banking for students or immigrants. So there's that approach. But I think the key word in the question is sustaining, because great, you can get to a point of scale, you can have delivered this great service. What stops a rocket internet play of someone coming along and doing exactly the same thing? And I think in Tom's interview actually with Simon recently, he talked about that sort of platform and network effects. And essentially they not only help you scale, but then protect that scale. Because if everyone is on one particular platform and you benefit from everyone else being on that platform, then that obviously has a certain amount of stickiness. And also if you've got a few million customers who are sticky and APIs into that, and then other players start coming in, so there's some platformification plays, then again you're creating this web of services, this web of players that again keeps those companies there or keeps those players there. So I think we are seeing a lot of the fintechs move towards the same place, whether it's Curve on one side or Revolut or Monzo or Starling or some of the big incumbents. How do you bring together that sort of everyday money portal that connects into all of those other services? And at the moment, it's a land grab. I mean, how quickly can you scale? How well can you attract other players in to build on your platform? And how do you make that two-sided marketplace work for you?
I think the answer is you can't. That's it. Like, I think the idea of basically you build a product and you sit on it forever and try and gain sustainable advantage is just dead, isn't it? I think this is the beautiful thing. There is nothing that isn't copyable in terms of what you guys have exposed all of your roadmap. There's nothing to stop somebody else going doing that. But what the point of doing it is that that's not the only thing you're going to be doing forever. I think this is internet banking has become incredibly stale and commoditized because nobody's really evolving the services to customers that actually mean anything. So if forever in the 25 years from now, if all that everybody's done is what we've done today, we've probably failed quite miserably. So I think the beauty is that this whole strategy of like fast follower that banks have kind of I don't want to be the first to market with this thing, I want somebody else to iron all the kinks out and then I'll follow it. We've seen banks are neither fast nor followers, nor in any sense sometimes having the ability to deliver these things as cost effectively as the challenges who are coming to market. So it kind of feels like it's a change in strategy and a change actually in, to your point with the API piece. This isn't like one and done. This is a continual evolution.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys said it. I don't think it's not like there's a few great ideas and the first people to get them win. There's we have an awesome ideas board at Monzo, and
Is it literally called that? Because that's
the awesome ideas board. I think it used to be called the badass ideas board, but we renamed it before we put it public. And the list is just huge. It's just there are so many cool things that haven't even been started yet. I think every one of those could, well, some of them couldn't, but a lot of those could be turned into amazing ideas that would make 1% of the population incredibly happy. So we'll never be done with this.
I think there's also something that around brand and identity and that idea that we like to do business with companies that represent who we want to be. There is an aspirational brand quality in Monzo, for instance, that while you might see the use of brand in, I don't know, washing powders or airlines, it's just the same thing but a different packaging. The fact that actually can be applied to a service that is differentiated in itself, even without the branding, but add in that meaning and that sort of transparency and openness and we're in it for the customers thing. And that's a heady mix. So I think that's often left off of this. There's as well.
Yeah, I agree. You know, Asus come out with an aluminium laptop, but it doesn't mean I'm going to buy it, right? So it's interesting dynamics in those things. I think probably there's a bunch of questions that are coming for you, Simon, as well. Yeah, so maybe we should flick through to some of those areas as well.
So from Fegan, is Monzo planning to offer PFM-like functionality?
We already have. The iOS app, there's a budgeting tool already and spending targets, and that is, I believe, coming to Android. It's on the roadmap. But like PFM is an interesting thing, personal finance management, so like helping you budget and save and predict your spending and everything else. When we did user research, we found that every person has a different relationship with their money and would prefer a different way of budgeting and saving. Like for some people, the big thing is roundups. They want to like save their pennies and join them together. And for some people, they just don't get that. They don't see that why there'd be a reason to do that. Some people want graphs. Some people want burn down charts. Some people want categorization of everything. And I don't think you can cram all of that into one little app on one device. We'd be building it forever, and we still would only cover half the use cases. So I think this is a great example of why you have an API, so that if people have, you know, a very specific use case they want, they can just go out and install the app that does that particular kind of PFM. So I expect that like PFM will be like, we will offer a solution that'll be valid for a lot of people and make a lot of people really happy, and then it'll be up to the market to create more. And yeah,
I find PFM interesting because it really started out, and I know David was involved in the implementation of one of the PFM solutions at a big bank. So I love to bring this stuff up. Yeah, just love this. But PFM version 1 was very much like data porn. It's like, here's a pie chart. And by the way, you spend 13% of your outgoings on transport. And it was one of those sort of like, oh, wow, that's interesting. How do I use this? I don't know. And so, and I think the move from PFM as a, we've got data, we're just going to show you what this thing looks like, towards what are customers trying to achieve, what is the style they want to achieve that in, and then how do we help them, and then that's how we actually do, give the data. Is version 2 or 3 or whatever. It's just a really different way of approaching it.
I think, like you say, it's a opportunity to change the dialogue with people, isn't it? And actually, if you're in a position where you're sharing and surfacing insights, then you're actually gaining permission to talk to people in a completely different way. You know, big incumbent banks are used to just displaying a transaction listing and a balance at best type thing. So moving to that insight thing moves you beyond. Like, there's no way you can jump from balance statement to your best friend insights type thing, with all the stuff that we were talking about earlier on around the opportunities with open banking. So, it kind of feels like, it's a large leap unless you get the permission of the customers to talk to you in that way.
Great. So next question from Barb McLean. How have you scaled your product team to respond to increased customer feedback due to growth? Have you found the kind of feedback you received has changed due to having a more diverse customer base?
It's not really my area. I'm an engineer. I focus mostly on the back end of the API, but we've got a full-time user researcher now who runs just continual user testing. And like we get so much feedback all the time from the community forums. Really, if you've got feedback from Monzo, there's something you don't like, put it on the community forums. We're incredibly open, and like anytime you've got like a 5-second spare at Monzo, you just jump on the community forums and read what people are saying and interact with people. It's like our feedback is our closeness to our community is not gone away or changed. Like there's 3,000 people in our developer Slack. So when I talk about APIs or things that we're changing, there's like 3,000 people in dev Slack to feedback and tell me how I'm wrong. So.
Wow.
And that's interesting. It's not only feedback on the product, but feedback on the process of developing new features, functionality, testing things.
Yeah.
Like the costs for Forex. And the question of which of these options do you like, and how does that suddenly got picked up by the national press, and suddenly it's a question of a very open discussion. So not just like, do you like it or not, but work with us is great.
Yeah, but they get like those kinds of things get brought up at our team meetings all the time. Like specific posts will be referred to, and it's like, these customers can't do this one thing, so Monzo's not appropriate to them, and like why? And we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about where that is in our roadmap, and like it's constant, continuous.
Got a couple of questions come through from Adam Williams for you. So the first one, what do the PSD2 security regulations actually require AISPs to do to demonstrate, love an acronym, they are handling data securely? Will Monzo be verifying that independent companies have actually performed a security assessment?
Okay, so the actual login process described in PSD2 broadly is the OAuth 2 login flow. But it's been sort of mandated to have very specific steps so that the user has a complete understanding of what permissions the AISP has requested and what they're going to be given by the bank. So it's very explicit, a very explicit implementation of OAuth 2. Under PSD2, it's not actually up to Monzo to verify individual AISPs. Like, they are regulated firms, authorized and regulated by the FCA. We're not actually allowed, under PSD2, banks aren't actually allowed to say no to an AISP. Like, the point of PSD2 is that customers have the right to share their data with third parties, and banks have to enable that. So when you become a customer of a third party, you become a customer of that third party, and the bank is just handing your data over at your request to that third party. You are a customer of that third party. So the FCA, like the process of registration for the AISP to the FCA is what ensures that it's a trusted ecosystem. But in the same way that a customer decides whether or not they trust a particular bank, they should decide whether or not they trust a particular AISP. And like, that's not, like, when we think about the best outcomes for customers, like our instinct is always to say that, we will of course do everything we can to protect our customers and to preserve their trust. And PSD2 sets limits on what we're allowed to do. But that being said, if a customer, if we detect, say a third party has had a data breach, and our customers' email addresses start to show up in email lists of data that's been breached, then we are allowed to revoke access to that third party and to inform the FCA about that. And this whole process is designed to protect customers. Like the AISP and PISP ecosystem that the FCA and the CMA are trying, so many acronyms, it's crazy, isn't it? That they're trying to foster is one where consumers are protected at all times, and they live inside a regulatory framework where everybody is regulated, and it's all very safe. And I think that's going to be successful.
Cool.
And secondly, from Adam, are the open banking APIs just for card transactions, or do they also expose, e.g. bank transfer information? Would the recipient be visible for these transactions?
Talk about specific.
Wow.
The open banking, the specifications are all on openbanking.org.uk. They're not too hard to read. Broadly, open banking splits into three parts. There's firms that are allowed to view your account, that are allowed to get access to information about your account. They're called AISPs. There's firms that are allowed to initiate payments. They're called PISPs. You might, in the future, you might go to pay for a flight, and whereas before you were offered the option to pay with a credit card, you might now be offered the option to pay with a credit card or open banking. And that's what the PISP permissions are for, so that firms can build that functionality. There's another form of authorization called CBPII, Card-Based Payment Initiator.
Wow, well done.
Yeah, which is, I don't know very much about, because Monzo aren't that. We're an ASPSP, so an application, I don't know, actually
account
service provider, so I have no idea actually. But it's all pretty complicated.
But I guess, this is a really specific question, and this is a very high level answer that I tend to give to banks, is that if an end customer can use your banking portal or app to get some particular data out, then roughly speaking, they should be able to do that through an API.
Sure.
So to this question, if I use my card and I go up to Pret across the road and buy a sandwich, it appears in my statement as a Pret thing. If I transfer money to you, and I can put the details in, then it will have some information about you. And roughly speaking, then that information is going to be available via API.
Yeah, the open banking people say that, that's their go-to. It's basically, if you can do it online now, then you can do it online with an API if you have the correct permissions. That's the North Star of this whole process.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because it's like, you know, Monzo being born into this era. Like, how much, I guess, of what your work that you're doing is being almost like fostered by this whole stuff. Like, we're seeing it's like the old organizations and trying to move to this. You guys are created in this stuff. That sounds like some sort of like Dark Knight Batman thing, doesn't it? Like, that was the born into darkness. And I'm not going to go there, but it's like, it's a really interesting. Like, how much of this is just focusing your strategy into leveraging all of the opportunity, whereas actually I kind of feel like some of the other organizations are having to catch up.
Yeah, I mean, the first email I ever got from Tom over 3 years ago now said, I'm starting a bank with an API and fine-grained information. It's like, that was the original idea.
You were just like, I'm in.
Yeah, that's literally what I said, pretty much. It didn't take very long for me to be convinced that it was the best idea ever. The Monzo doesn't just have an API, it's not bolted on the side. Like, Monzo is an API, essentially. Like, our developer API has always just been a subset of the API that our first-party clients use. And behind that that sort of API layer, like the back side of Monzo is all the back-end services are just APIs internally as well. Like, all of Monzo is basically one giant API with just permissions about what is exposed to the outside world and permissions, and then fine-grained permissions about who can do what. So we're not, like, we are an API company.
Yeah. And I think there's a problem, or something we often see with some of the big banks is you can get stuck in the middle. You know, actually, because modern financial services organizations will need to have this amazing product-based API at the back. What it has to be, it's going to have to be super efficient, super effective, have very few people running it. It just has to be like that, no matter what type of business you are. And then layering on all of these services, either internally or externally. But I guess there's a danger to almost be caught in the middle, to do everything and to bolt a little API on the side, rather than be an amazing product hub and an amazing sort of service play at the same time. And I think that often comes across.
It comes back to the conversation we were having about bank as a platform, bank as a service earlier on, right? The only way, if you play that forward in terms of the difference between distribution of other people's products or creating your own products or being your own distribution channel for your own products, the only way that works is if your back end is sophisticated enough, exactly like you say, to be cost effective. And we talk about this a lot, but anywhere where there is a battle between production and manufacturing and distribution, the people who are sort of moved away from the customer have to get really efficient at doing manufacturing, and the cost efficiencies in most core banking systems and architectures, and purely from a hundreds of thousands of staff perspective in big companies, makes it really difficult to get manufacturing down as a key. So I just generally think it feels like it's the like you say, there wasn't this like zombie apocalypse moment when the date hit last Saturday and like nobody was like, here's 1,000 things we've done. But it just feels like this is going to be this slow simmering of opportunity that's bubbling away now, which, I kind of think it just turns up the heat on traditional banking of what good service looks like, which is amazing.
Yeah, a few people have said open banking will be underwhelming until suddenly it isn't.
Technology revolution, it happens, right? I think that's probably all of the questions that we've got time for today, though. So, Simon Vans-Colina, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Where can people learn a little bit more about you?
Simon VC on Twitter, or
Fantastic. And me, Jason, and the other Simon will be back next week. So if you like this, head over to www.fintechinsidernews.com. You can sign up and ask us any questions that you want to. If you don't want to ask them over that, feel free to drop me an email on david@11fs.com, and you can ask anything anonymous as well. So subscribe to YouTube, subscribe to Fintech Insider News, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks very much.
We go.